Well, it's a couple of minutes after 6. I think we should start. Hopefully we have enough time to get all our thoughts and questions and ideas in. Let me start by welcoming everybody to the second program series. This is sponsored by Interfaith Action. It's a virtual series on the situation in Gaza. So last week we listened to an overview of what's happening in Gaza right now. Our guest was David Dumke, and next week our guest is going to be Lara Friedman. She's the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. My name is Naveen Khalil, and I'm on the leadership team with Interfaith Action. I'm the advisor for Interfaith Collaboration and Action. I would like to welcome Rummana Hussain. She is our speaker today. She is an editorial board member and columnist at the Chicago Sun-Times, and she will be talking to us about the media coverage of the war in Gaza in the US, at least. She will also give us some insight into her experience over the past month in the newsroom, where decisions are being taken about what stories to cover and how to cover them. Basically since the bombing started about a month ago. I'd like to encourage the audience to ask questions after she's done speaking. You can also type your questions or just speak into the mic, raise your hand, and Larry and Sid would be able to help me with that. But meanwhile, if everyone could mute their microphones, that would be greatly appreciated. So I'd like to begin. Well, first, I'd like to draw your attention to the upcoming events page has several resources. If anybody's interested to go and sort of read up more and watch a little more about what's going on right now. And but otherwise, I think we could start. I'd like to begin by playing just a short video about some of the footage we've been seeing from Gaza. There's nothing graphic, although they're very poignant. And this may or may not be something you've actually seen in the media here, but the rest of the world, definitely in the Middle East, is covering a lot of what's actually happening. So I will share screen now. And
in Gaza, for the past 2 days, we were in absolute isolation, not only from the outside world, but also from each other's in the same city. No internet connection, no line, way, or any mean of communication. I'm currently at my parents' house, where my family and my in-laws' family and so many other relatives seek refuge. Over 55 people. The only way for us to get some bits and pieces of news was by gathering around my mother's-in-law old radio, anticipating any news of de-escalation or ceasefire. The situation in Gaza has become absolutely inhumane and unbearable by all international standards. The population of Gaza is in immense need for humanitarian support, including clean drinkable water, food and fuel or electricity to run hospitals that already suffer from severe shortage of medical supplies. Gaza people and the children of Gaza needs protection, and for sure tons and tons of psychosocial and mental support. As a humanitarian worker, I feel absolutely helpless, as I cannot provide my kids with the basic needs of life, let alone the children of Gaza.
This is an avalanche of human suffering that's 100% man-made. It is the worst humanitarian catastrophe I've experienced in my lifetime and in my growingly long career in humanitarian medicine. And it's burning through the hearts of every single humanitarian that I know. You know, I'm going to paint a picture for you of the degree of suffering that we're seeing. People keep asking me about medical aid and hospitals and the situation of the hospitals. The entire hospital healthcare system collapsed almost a week ago. It was announced on TV for the whole world to see. And in that week, there has been indiscriminate bombardment. And I don't even know if indiscriminate's the right term, because it's targeting healthcare facilities, ambulances, churches, mosques, schools, refugee camps, densely populated refugee camps, wiping out entire families in a second, entire multi-generational extended families in a second. There are almost 1,000 families in the Gaza Strip who have had at least 2 members of their family, at least 2 members killed in the last 3 weeks. There are almost 4,000 children who have been killed and identified, excluding almost 1,000 children whose bodies are still trapped under the rubble. Some of them may be alive for a long period before they ultimately die under the rubble. And I'm sorry if there are any young, children watching this. Perhaps this is a good time to ask them to leave the room. But I think it's important that I paint a picture, particularly when I'm following a news narrative that almost dismisses this avalanche of suffering that is unprecedented in modern times. There's an acronym in the Gaza Strip right now. I'm a pediatric intensive care doctor. I see a lot of suffering in my career. There's an acronym that is unique to the Gaza Strip, and it's WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. Children, and it is used not infrequently in the last 3 weeks. It was coined in the last three weeks. One physician told me a few days ago that a little girl came in wounded, and she had a piece of paper in her pocket that she handed to him. He sent me a picture of the piece of paper. It had 27 names on it, and she said, "These are the members of my family that were with me in my home. Please look for them. Please look for them under the rubble. Don't look for this one," and she points to the name of her sister. "I know she's already dead." This is a 10-year-old little girl. Wounded Child, No Surviving Family should not exist as an acronym.
Okay, these videos are in the links to them are in the resources section as well, if you'd like to visit afterwards. I will open the floor to Rummana to please tell us about what's been happening in the newsroom for a month.
First of all, I just want to say hello to everybody, and thank you for taking time in your evening to spend discussing this topic with me. I'll just give you a little bit about my background. I'm not Middle Eastern or Palestinian, but I am Muslim, and I was born and raised in Chicago. And I've been a journalist for since the mid-90s, and I was around when 9/11 happened, and a lot of Muslims and Arabs. And first of all, I want to say that most Palestinians are Muslims, but there's a large population that's also Christian. But a lot of times Palestinians get conflated with Muslims in a lot of the dialogue that we're seeing in the press or just in general from what you probably have known. So there are members of the Palestinian community in my mosque and in other Chicago area mosques as well. And I also grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Jewish when I was growing up. So I do have a lot of Jewish friends and colleagues as well. So I know this is a very emotional and touchy subject, but I can talk from my perspective as a Muslim American journalist and just watching the coverage of this situation in the Middle East right now. So after 9/11, one of the things that a lot of Muslims and Arabs had noticed is that a lot of people are talking about us without actually having us as part of the conversation. And we've been otherized for a very, very long time. We don't get the same treatment as other victims get. And I'm not saying that what happened on October 7th was terrible. And I think that the stories that we have about the hostages, I have to tell you that in Chicago, the first two hostages that were released back are from Evanston, Illinois, which is the suburb right outside of Chicago. I grew up like 10 minutes away from there. Judith Renan and Natalie Renan. So obviously those stories that touch the Jewish community, people who have family in Israel, that's very, very understandable. And so maybe like a couple of days after, like maybe just like a day after the October 7th attack, we obviously had a lot of stories about how the Jewish community is feeling and if they have family members overseas, which is legitimate. But at the same time, the Chicago area, there's a suburb in the southwest side here called Bridgeview, and it probably has the largest population of Palestinians outside of the occupied territories in the Middle East. And so, we barely saw any stories about, at this point, Israel had started retaliating. I did not see any stories from my news organizations or any news organizations talking to Palestinian Americans about how they were feeling and how they, had been dealing with losses as well. And it turns out just a week after the October 7th attack, there was a 6-year-old boy who was murdered in a suburb in the Chicago area. The 6-year-old boy was basically stabbed by his landlord, allegedly stabbed by his landlord, 71-year-old landlord. The little boy was basically seen as a threat to this man, according to prosecutors. The man had heard about, he had been listening to conservative radio, and that is what prosecutors are saying set him off. And they said that he had heard about this day of jihad that Muslims were going to carry out, that the Palestinians were going to carry out. And he had gotten along fine with the family. But it was after he heard these radio reports that he went and he attacked the little boy. And, he told the mom, he mentioned to the mom while he was carrying out his attack that he was upset about what was happening in the Middle East, according to prosecutors. And the mother said, give peace a chance. But he ended up stabbing the boy 26 times, according to authorities. And the mother he stabbed as well. Muslim funerals are usually held a day after someone was killed. So because the mother was hospitalized, she did not attend her son's funeral. So that was a very, very tragic murder that happened right after these attacks. And a lot of people in the Palestinian and the Muslim community feel like it's because of the dehumanization of Palestinians, the treatment of the way that our government officials talk about Palestinians. And again, nobody's saying what happened on October 7th is acceptable, but there's a deafening silence about the victims on the Palestinian side. And to talk to people there are Americans who are stuck in Gaza right now. And, we even hear from our president, he just recently started talking about how he's going to try to get Americans out of Gaza. But in the beginning, there was no sort of discussion about this. I think in the first address that President Biden gave following the October 7th attack, he did not mention any Palestinian suffering at all. And to act as if there isn't, no matter how you feel about it, there have been over 10,000 Palestinians who have been killed since the October 7th attack. And today, President Biden had said that there was no way that there was going to be ceasefire anytime soon, or at least not today, he said. He's actually in Chicago, and I have to tell you that he was interrupted by a pro-Palestinian protester in the Chicago area. So that was just some of the feelings that we had in the newsroom. And me, and there's a reporter who's of Lebanese descent, and we are affiliated with the radio station, and there's a Palestinian American producer there. And we talked to our bosses and our higher ups and said that there needs to be we told them, there are a lot of Palestinian Americans in the Chicago area, correct? And we've been kind of like basically talking to, which is a good thing. We're talking to our management and pointing things out that we think are either unfair or the way they're presented can be sometimes skewed a certain way. And I'll give you some examples of that. But we had to tell our news desk about one family who had lost over 30 members in the Israeli retaliation attacks, and we were able to get a story on it. So it's a lot of extra work that we're doing, and it shouldn't be, because people should know that Palestinians can be Americans too, that Muslims are Americans too, that they are affected by this what happened. And so it's a lot of just talking and telling people, pointing things out. I have to mention there are a couple of things that I had to point out specifically. There was a columnist who had talked about what's happening right now in the Middle East, and he had a picture that accompanied his column. And the column basically was a picture of pro-Palestinian protesters in Munich, Germany. And the first part of the caption said, "Here are rally goers who supported the October 7th Hamas attack." And then the second part of the caption said, "Rallies like this have been held all around the world, including Chicago." When I saw that, I immediately told our top editor, I said that this is misleading because it's acting as if anybody who's pro-Palestinian is automatically a supporter of what happened on October 7th. And she did change the caption, and we ended up putting out some sort of clarification. And I told her, I said, I don't know what motivations anybody who's this specific protester had, but I can tell you that a lot of people who are protesting what's happening have been protesting against innocent civilians being killed and the treatment of Palestinians for generations. So I pointed that out to her, and it was interesting because she told me, well, the first part of the caption actually came from the photographer who took this picture in Germany. And what a lot of people don't understand is because of what Germany did with the Holocaust, is that Germany does not allow any sort of protests against Israel in Germany anymore. And so I don't know if the photographer just automatically, just had assumed that. And so I told her that could be the case, but I go, we shouldn't be putting out that anybody who's, that people who've been attending rallies, and there've been a lot of rallies in the Chicago area since October 7th, in support of the Palestinians, that they shouldn't necessarily be saying that they're pro-Hamas. And I think a lot of the language, I know and I'm sure there's a lot of, discussion and debate that can be had, but I said, I just think I believe that's misleading, because I'm sure if you talk to people who are protesters, and I think the next protest that we had, I told them, why don't you actually ask the protesters? And relating to that, so we had another story where a group of people who are they're pro-Palestinian protesters. It was a 400-word story, and 250 of the words, one of the reporters that we've been watching some of the language that's been used, he counted, he's like, basically 240 of the words was commentary from a man who was pro-Israeli. And he basically was saying what the protesters were meaning when they were out on the streets, basically in support of Palestinians. He basically said that these the pro-Palestinian protesters are celebrating the deaths of Palestinians and Israelis. And this reporter had pointed out, he talked to our editor and said that this is also wrong, because why do we have someone who's not part of this protest describing what these protesters are doing and what they're exactly, what they're out there actually saying? I mean, unless you talk to someone, I mean, you don't go to a Black Lives Matters rally and then talk to someone else who wasn't even there and say, well, this is what they're saying, So, it's things like that. And, we have had some pretty, robust discussions, and I think the discussions will continue. I have to say, like, it feels like 9/11 again. The way our government officials are talking. We just had Rashida Tlaib censored yesterday, and maybe 2 days ago. And just the discussions that people are having, a lot of people feel like it's like deja vu again. It's like Palestinians aren't given the same voice. They're not, they're right after the October 7th attack, there were some Palestinians who were coming on air. I didn't see this in the in the print, but there were a lot of people who were coming and talking to people about what happened. There were some Palestinians who had lost some family members in Israel's retaliation. And a lot of these, American TV hosts, they the second question they ask is, do you condemn what Hamas did on October 7th? Now, why do people this happened to us after 9/11? Everybody wanted, it's like something happened in overseas, and people would ask me if I condemn an attack that happened overseas that had nothing to do with me. And so, I think that it's sad that people have to prove that they're human or what they're saying is, authentic, that they don't approve of this violence, because I don't see that happening to anybody who is, is a supporter of Israel. I don't hear them saying, do you support the bombing of civilians? Maybe they are, but by protesters, that could be possible, but I don't see that happening them when they're coming on news. I don't hear the talking heads asking them that. So a lot of people are feeling that, in newsrooms, and a lot of reporters who are either Muslim and or Arab, we've all been kind of chatting about the things that we've had to deal with in the last few weeks. And it's something, like I said, I think it's important to have these discussions, because what's happening in the Middle East is devastating. And I think the discussions need to be had, and this isn't something that's going to be going away anytime soon. And I have to tell you that, there is this feeling that if we weren't in the newsroom, some of this stuff, it wasn't going to get covered. We just had, I'm trying to encourage, I wrote about, after the first week, I did write about my opinion about the situation and how I feel. And just this week, tomorrow, or we had it online already, but I am trying to encourage more Palestinian voices in the op-ed section. I had asked a friend of mine from WBZ, that's a radio station that we're affiliated with. She had gotten a Palestinian educator, and she wrote a column, and that's going to appear in the paper tomorrow. We also, there is an education story about a Muslim girls' school. They're talking about how they're feeling. And so I think it helps to have people like me in the newsroom, or Arabs in the newsroom. I think it just adds to the voices. And again, I'm not saying that we don't have to hear, we have to hear from the Jewish community too. We just need to make sure that everybody's voices are being heard, and that people recognize that Palestinians can be Americans too, that Muslims can be American too, and we don't have to otherize, people that are like us. So I think that's just been a really big frustration in what we're trying to get our voices out there. One of the resources that we're, a lot of people like me and my colleagues who are Arab or Muslim are asking that we look at this Arab and Middle Eastern Journalists Association guide about what is happening in the Middle East. One of the things that people say is that Hamas, it was an unprovoked attack. And yes, this is what started the retaliation, but a lot of the stories that we're seeing are missing the context. I think a lot of people don't realize that, the Palestinians are treated a lot differently than an Israeli citizen is in that region. One of the other things that we're noticing is that the way the people who died have been treated. I know David Dumke had spoken last week, and I think this is true about how people in my communities feel. It's like the victims who aren't Muslim or aren't Palestinians are humanized. They're killed. And when it comes to the Palestinians, they're kind of like faceless, people who don't have lives. And I'm seeing on social media, people are sharing, who a lot of these victims are. There's obviously more than 10,000 people. There's also been 35 journalists who have been killed, and 20, I think over 24 UN workers so far. I think, and also as part of this AMIJA guidelines, it says that when people are killed, say that they're killed. You don't say that they're dead. So a lot of people say that there's usually the passive voice when it comes to Palestinians. And another thing that we also think is important to double check sources, whether that means Israeli officials or Palestinian officials. We had Joe Biden come on the news a couple of days ago, or during, I think it was a press conference a few days ago, and he said that he didn't trust the number of the victims that the Palestinians were giving. And meanwhile, it's not that that our governments don't lie. Israel could have some could be misspeaking too. And if you've been paying attention to the Twitter accounts of some Israeli officials, they're not necessarily being professional about it. They just said one of them just equated the journalists with terrorists. Just to, I think it was today. And so it's because of our relationship with Israel and the way that Palestinians have been talked about for years and years and years, is that, you have kind of this lopsided way that we're covering things. Like I said, it's a lot better than it was, I would say 15, 20 years ago, but it isn't what it should be. And so these conversations are still going. I have to tell you that The Onion, I don't know if any of you guys read The Onion. The Onion has been doing a very, very good job about, and I have to tell you, I don't think anybody Middle Eastern or Muslim works at The Onion. They're actually based in Chicago. And so their headlines have been really, really good about the way the media in America covers the Middle East and is covering the situation right now. They just had something a few days ago about how the New York Times invents entirely new numerical systems to avoid reporting Gazan death toll. They had that headline a couple of days ago. The first one one of the first ones they came up with, that was The Onion stands with Israel because it seems like you can get in less trouble for that. And then they had something about, they had a primer about what to know about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And one of the first questions was, how has the media approached the conflict? And they said swift and irresponsibly. And it said, how many people have died? That was this other question. And said, that depends on whether you count Palestinian deaths as well. So, you have, satirical organizations, news organizations also critiquing the way that we cover the situation in the Middle East and the way we cover Israeli victims and Palestinian victims. And like I said, I am working at a paper in Chicago, Chicago Sun-Times. So we're more of a local paper. We cover we cover issues obviously that happen overseas, but how they impact people living in the city and in the suburbs. And so we do use wire copy. We use the Associated Press about the general situation, the day-to-day. But so our stories are about how our community is affected. And my whole thing is we just need more and more Palestinian voices. And again, we can't pretend that there's not Palestinians living in Chicago when we have one of the biggest populations of Palestinians in the United States. And so that's something that I just think that it's very important to talk to Palestinians, and that, like I said, that doesn't mean you don't talk to, the Jewish community or the Israeli community. You talk to them too. But I'm just saying that in the coverage, we just have to make sure that we're covering this appropriately and doing a sufficient job. And I don't think we are. And you can talk to anybody in the media who is Muslim or Middle Eastern, and we kind of feel the same way. And it's, like I said, it's a dialogue that we're having. And I have a pretty good relationship with most of my bosses. I don't agree with them. I don't see eye to eye with them on a lot of things, and not just this topic. But, we agreed that we're going to continue to talk about it. One of the things is language. I know that's a very sensitive topic right now. In our affiliate radio station, we had a genocide expert talking about a genocide in Gaza, and we had a couple listeners that were upset by that use of the word. And so that caused some discussion. I was invited to a discussion about the words that we're using and how we're using it. And one of the younger reporters had mentioned that he doesn't like the term the Israel Hamas war, because he said that it basically doesn't include that there's Palestinians dying. And right now that's what Associated Press uses. And so we're still trying to talk about language. And I know that's something that's, there's a lot of discussion about the language and about the slogans that, certain protesters are using. So I think as long as we keep the conversation going, I just want to keep it productive. And it's been exhausting the last couple of weeks, because I just want to make sure that the Palestinian voices, that people who are doing things in the community don't get lost. And that's just something that I've kind of like kept in the back of my mind. And I have been asked for, by other reporters, by my colleagues, to look over stories. The Washington, D.C. reporter 2 days ago had asked me to look over her column that she wrote about when Joe Biden, initiated his Islamophobic Islamophobia strategy. So I looked at that and I said, yeah, I'll take a look at it. And so it's something that, we just have to keep in mind and just continue and just have the dialogue. And it's been frustrating and it's been exhausting, but, I personally hope the conflict or whatever is happening, the siege in Gaza ends soon. But I don't think this is something that we're probably going to be talking about for a few more weeks. So I'm sure I'm going to be more exhausted and explaining and talking a little bit more in the future as well.
Thank you, Rummana. That was very insightful. I truly appreciate your perspective on all of this. It's interesting you brought up the point of the language and the lexicon being used now. There's a lot of new words being used over the past month, whether to describe the Palestinians or what Israel is doing. Actually, our fourth program, which we will post soon, is going to be discussing this lexicon that is now being introduced into the narrative. So I hope many of you will be able to join us for that. I think we have some time now to take questions. I will begin, though, with Larry Feldman. He's a co-moderator with us for the Interfaith series, and he's from the Jewish community. And we would love to either hear a question or a comment from you, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen, and thank you, Rummana. I will share that I have a very different experience of what's been happening in the media. Every day when I go online to see the news about the Middle East, the only thing I've been hearing for many weeks now is about people being killed in Gaza, and more specifically, Palestinians, civilian Palestinians being killed in Gaza. That seems to me to be the predominant coverage by a wide margin, and certainly it should be covered. What's happening in Gaza is terrible, and I don't like that this is how the Israeli government is responding to the horrible circumstances of October 7th. But how quickly the media stopped talking about October 7th. When Naveen, and maybe this was supposed to be the way that you introduced tonight, but you said we're going to be talking about what's happening in Gaza. I thought we were going to be talking about what's happening in Gaza and in Israel. Israel was attacked. Thousands of people were killed. Israel is still being attacked. Rockets are still being fired into Israel. Terrible things are happening to both Palestinians and Israelis. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and focus on all of the things that are going on. So that would be my request of all of us, to stay focused on all of the things that are going on, and then try to, as much as we possibly can. And I know this is going to be happening later in our series, although I wish it could be happening sooner. Unfortunately, so often when we do series about any issue, we spend so much of our time talking about the problem, and then at the last minute, we have a little bit of discussion about the solutions. I would like there to be more discussion of how to end this, and then how to prevent a recurrence, how to move forward in a way where Palestinians and Jews can live together in peace in that troubled area.
Of course, yes, Larry. Just to clarify, the reason that I didn't mention what happened in Israel is because we're a month into this, and we're talking about the media coverage here. So how it has been covered, and I think Rummana covered that well. So the intention wasn't to exclude what had happened. It was just the topic today is, well, how much good media or balanced media are we getting here?
Yeah, and I have to stress, I do think that we have to talk about, what's happening in Israel too. And unfortunately, I guess what's happening, we are talking about the deaths now because the numbers have gone up. Last time I checked, it was 1,400, and I know obviously there's like over 200 hostages, and that's what the hostages need to be released. I know people have been asking for a ceasefire. I don't know how this is going to end, but yes, I do think that all communities, and like I said, I'm speaking as someone who is Muslim. This is from my community's perspective, and I'm not saying that there aren't complaints from the Jewish American community or anybody who is pro-Israel. Like, I was going to say that we actually, a couple of days ago, we had a caption, and it was a picture, and it said that these are hostages that were allegedly taken by Hamas. And we had a couple of readers complain about that. And I think it's good. Like, you have to have that dialogue. And that's what I'm saying. Like, we have the dialogue, but at least from my end in Chicago, we have a large Palestinian community. And in the beginning, they were not focused on when when they were, and we did talk about what happened, the hostages. We actually, like I said, one of the two women, the teenager and her mother, were from Evanston. And so we had coverage about the locals that were affected by this. So I'm not saying that, we aren't supposed to be ignoring what happened on October 7th. Nobody should. I'm just telling you from my perspective, and from our coverage, what I've seen in Chicago and what people are talking about. And I'm sure there are people from the Jewish, like literally you're saying, from the Jewish community. I'm sure your perspective can be a little different, but that's the perspective that I've had from my lens.
I understand. And part of what we are trying to accomplish here is to hear from many different perspectives. And so I'd be interested if other people have comments or questions that you want to share.
Sid, would you like to make a comment or a question? Sid is my colleague at Interfaith Action and also a co-moderator in this series.
Just that I think the original statement that was issued by Interfaith Action several days after October 7th were that we were calling on the application of international humanitarian law as well as adherence to the Geneva Conventions on war, that these should equally be applied both to Israel as well as to Gaza. And I think we continue to say that these standards of law, of basic humanitarian treatment, need to be applied equally. and that these laws really are connected to the multiple faith traditions that comprise the rich faith diversity here in Southwest Michigan.
Thank you. I think Sif Al-Maleh would like to go next. And let me begin by saying I truly appreciate that Egyptian flag behind you. I have one at my house as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Naveen. I recognized the flag last session, and it made me happy as well to see it. So thank you so much, Naveen, for organizing this, and Rummana, thank you for your insightful ideas that you have presented very clearly. And what first question comes into my mind? So I have two questions. The first one is, like, is it actively imposed on the media? Is it like systematically pushed forward in the media community, or is it more of passive ignorance? And which one of them, how can we help or support in shaping the media more to be more inclusive and more presenting all the voices without dehumanizing any voices, or without putting moral checks, or like by asking the question, oh, do you condemn Hamas? So that's my first question. The second question is, I know you said that you're speaking from your background only as a Muslim journalist, but also there are the other voices that I noticed that they have been very marginalized recently, which is also the Jewish voices for peace, or Jewish voices that are pro-Palestinians. Yesterday, I have seen the movie of Israelism, the documentary, and I had the luxury of meeting the director, who was a pro-Palestinian Israeli, and I had the question of, like, yeah, why aren't more voices from the Jewish community who are pro-Palestinians being featured in the media as well? So these are my two questions, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Those are both really good questions. I don't think, in some cases, I mean, if you look at some media, like on Fox News, or there's definitely some columnists who think a certain way. I mean, that's deliberate. In a general newsroom, I don't think it's deliberate. I just think it's passive ignorance about the way certain communities are presented or ignored. I think newsrooms, compared to like 15, 20 years ago, especially post George Floyd, there is a push to try to diverse, our newsrooms are not diverse. They're trying to be more diverse. They're definitely more diverse than they were like even like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because now there's a conscious effort to make sure you have diverse newsrooms and diverse voices. And one of the things that we talk about in the press is, we want to be objective. But, even when we try to be objective, you do bring in who you are as a person and your experiences. And, for the longest time, we just had a certain voice. And, after 9/11, we still had newsrooms that were very, very not diverse. And the way certain people were talked about, for someone like me, I could tell automatically it was Islamophobic. I'm like, well, the word they're talking about certain things and certain Muslims, there's a lot of presumptions being made and a lot of things being said about my community. So I think it's a little different, but I do think a lot of it is ignorance, and it can be exhausting for any journalists of color. I know a lot of Black journalists feel this way too about when it comes to their communities. I know a lot of Latino reporters feel this way too. They feel like they have to do an over education, and just to have people understand. So I have my job. I work as an editorial writer, so I write on behalf of the paper and I do a columnist. But on top of that, these last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been asked to like reread things and, ask for my commentary, ask if I know anybody who knows about this or that. And, we should already have been connected to these communities, and they should know where to go. Where I've told them, like, when anything happens involving, a Muslim, it's like they come to me and I'm like, I already gave you this number, like, X amount of years ago. And so, yeah, I think it's mostly ignorance, and a mostly, I think this attitude of where people still look at people like us as foreign and not American. And that's one thing that I think you kind of have to stick into people's heads, that we are American. And one of the, you also brought up a good point about, a lot of young Jewish Americans are protesting with a lot of pro-Palestinian marchers as well. And we have talked to them, but I think whenever you do have a pro-Palestinian, rally, I think now reporters are so worried about, oh, we have to talk to Palestinians, but a lot of their pro-Palestinian rallies are very diverse. And I think it's a good point to point that out. There was a couple of rallies in DC. There was a couple of rallies in the country over the weekend in DC. I don't think either my paper nor the Tribune, which is our major competitor, I don't think, there's been so many protests, so we don't cover. So because it was a national story, there was more national coverage. But those are pretty diverse crowds. And so I think it's we haven't really talked that much, but that's one of the things. It's interesting because the people, who are quote unquote pro-Palestinian, it's changing from what we've seen 5 years ago even. And so I think there's been some discussions. There's a friend of mine who has a podcast, and he had a music critic who's Israeli, and I think he's a millennial, and he had talked about his stance on the whole situation, and he's very pro-Palestinians, and so he had come on air and talked about it. So there's things like that, but I think the discussion is kind of being talked about, but it's not being talked about as much as you would think. I don't know if you guys had seen, but Kamala Harris's stepdaughter on her Instagram page did have a link to an organization to help the Gazans. And so it's just it's just changing the discussion. And I think that needs to be shed light on that, about how different people from different communities feel about it. I think it's a good point.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Rummana, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about the media coverage. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined us this evening as we come together and try and understand what is happening in the Middle East. Please join us next week, next Thursday, also at 6 o'clock. You will need to register for the next program. It is called The Right to Live. Our speaker is Lara Friedman, and she will be talking about displacement, settlements, right of return. So more, rather than the hottest, topics that are happening right now, she's going to give us a little more perspective about what it looks like to be in Israel and the occupied territories and living there. So please join us then. And just checking one more thing. Yes, the registration is right here in the chat, and it's also on our upcoming events page. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate seeing you all.
Thank you.